Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get the meeting started, the Special Subcommittee on Tax Revision, and we're going to start with our second hearing on Representative Belton, HB 32. If you can read your LC number for everyone and tell us about that.
Well, to be honest, sir, that I understand that you have a substitute. Is that correct?
On the
A new substitute is what I was told by the chairman.
it's on the iPad. Do you have a what's your our LC number is LC 431950S. Thank you. 1950S.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I won't go through the whole bill unless you want me to, but this is the 13th different draft of this bill. It's a teacher tax credit that will help to give a tax credit of $3,000 for 5 years to a teacher, new teacher or a previous teacher who elects to move to a new school that is either very rural or a low performance school. This is a universe of 325 schools that would be eligible. The Department of Education would select 100 schools, and within those 100 schools would be 1,000 total teachers. So it'd be a $3 million ask per year until the expiration date, which is going to be December 31st of 2031. It was voted unanimously out of the House Education Committee, unanimously out of the House Higher Education Committee. Last year, it got almost unanimous passage in the floor and just died in the Senate. And I stand for questions, sir.
All right, we did go over this bill fairly in depth. What questions from committee members? If not, this being second hearing, is there have a move to pass in a second? Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor of HB 32, LC number 431950S, say aye. Any opposed, say no. All right, it passes on to full committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Do you want to go last? Representative Montmahan, are you? Mark, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Come on up. Come on up. Just present right here. This is House Bill 302, and we're all looking at LC 2802223S. Is that what you're working off of as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, LC 280223S.
Thank you. Go,
Ready?
please.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, what this bill does is it limits a local jurisdiction's ability to tax. And how does it do that? It basically says that a regulatory fee cannot actually it cannot extend past the cost of an actual regulatory activity. So, for example, if a regulatory action costs me $20, I cannot take that. I cannot charge a fee of, say, $40, right, and kind of backfill the expenses for the jurisdiction for a regulatory action. And so under lines 22 through 25, you'll see where it says, "In the proceeds of such regulatory fee shall be used to fund such regulatory activity and not the general operations of the local government, provided that the local government shall not be required to establish separate accounts for such proceeds." So they're not required to keep a separate account for the regulatory agency. Maybe it's an inspection or something to that nature, but they do have to approximate the cost, and it cannot exceed it under this new code section. If we go further, we have a really clean up to the bill. Under line 34 and 39, we have stricken shooting galleries and firearms ranges. Under line 39, it's firearms dealers. We have moved those to line section 90 and 92. That brings us, there was a conflict in the code where effectively a local jurisdiction cannot charge those certain fees. Only the state can. So I think that's in Title 16, 11.8, I believe. And I can get that for you if you need it, Mr. Chairman. But this just brings us into compliance and takes that conflict out of our code. It's really just clean up more than anything else. And with that, and I'm sorry. Skip down to section 109. We're going to change the way. So if our goal is to approximate the cost of the regulatory action, the actual action itself, we're creating what I feel are these false barriers, right, or lanes to do that. And so we're saying, hey, we're going to use a per square footage, right, or we're going to do we're going to use the price of the project to approximate the cost of the regulatory action. Well, just to be frank, the cost of the project or the square footage has little to do with the actual cost of the regulatory action. And so as we talk about that, we say, is it a warehouse? Is it medical space? Is it, what could it be? And so we feel like giving them the latitude to say, as long as you're approximating your costs, that is the intention of the regulatory action, right? So you charge what it costs you to do the regulatory action, but not more, right? And to keep those funds geared towards that action. It's a very confusing code section. I'm happy to take questions and more than happy to answer any that come my way.
All right. Thank you for that presentation. And I see some of the, like you say, the cleanup and clarification. Are there questions from the committee members here or online? I know we have some that have requested to speak to the bill on through Zoom. Are there any other questions for the bill author? This is the third hearing, I believe, where we've been working on perfecting this bill. All right, if not, I believe there was a Mr. Bowersox.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay?
All good.
Perfect. Ryan Bowersox, GMA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak to the bill. And thank you, Representative Monahan, for working with us on these provisions in the past. I'll be brief. I know we've been pushed back a little already. I just wanted to share some concerns we've received from our members over removing the two methods in calculating the fees that the representative mentioned on lines 109 through 120. We've heard a lot of concern that they're worried over the burden of removing these processes and reestablishing the calculation of these fees. Most of the feedback we received, we were told that accommodation to fees is already currently used and based on the specific project at hand. There's a concern over trying to switch this over to flat and hourly fees, that this can involve changing ordinances, softwares, and then trying to find the specific rate for the fee or the hourly rate that'll be sure to bring in the correct amount of money to fund the regulatory activity occurring here. So what's going to be required to run these offices for the year. And these funds are already required to only be used for the regulatory activity and cannot be used for the general operation in any way. The methods used, these are not unique to Georgia. These, my understanding is these are standard methods used by other states, and most are based on the International Code Council valuations, which are incorporated in the code and help to limit and standardize the costs used. This provides reliability and transparency to the process. So we would just request that the committee is cautious in removing these two methods used and be aware of the impact that it could have. So I appreciate your time today and being able to appear here and speak to the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion among the committee regarding the bill? This being the third hearing, what is the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion to pass. Is there a second? Second. Any other further discussion? If not, all in favor of the passage of House Bill 302, LC 280223S, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. Bill goes on to full committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And now we will go on to House Bill 469. Chairman Stevens.
Members of committee, thank you for your time today. And I know we're on a schedule, so I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as I can. What you've got is a historic tax credit bill that has a history now of about a 5-year track record from whenever it was passed before. This is one of the few tax credits, for better or worse, that the Senate actually likes because the numbers have come back quite positive on this, on its track record. The program is due to sunset this year, but effectively it's already sunsetted because it is fully subscribed, so there's no more credits available. It follows the recommendations of the House Study Committee. And keep in mind, this legislation does not change the current program that incentivizes the rehab of residential properties, historic homes. This is only about large commercial structures known as certified structures. And you'll see the definition of what a large structure is on line 20. And note these structures have to meet the qualifications for this tax credit. Also, this substitute contains language based on the committee chairman's desire to further the incentive of low-income or workforce housing when practical. House Bill 469, very quickly, defines what workforce housing is on line 52 through 55. It raises the project cap currently at $5 and $10 million to 10 and 15, which is on 70 through 75. This change is in recognition of the incredible cost of old buildings, keeping in mind that these larger cap is only available if you, number one, create 200 jobs or more and create a payroll of $5 million or more, which is a big deal. That's the second cap. It raises the floor from 300,000 to 500,000. For smaller projects, they don't actually count towards the project cap. It raises the annual program cap from 25 million to 50 million, line 77 through 97. This program is currently the victim of its own success with annual caps for the years 2017, 18, 19, and 20, and 21 were met. And I guess the question is, why do we limit our success? It establishes a workforce credit, again, line 81 through 83. And it creates a rollover for any unused cap space, lines 78 through 80. Even though the program has been fully subscribed, sometimes cap space is taken up by a project that is abandoned or failed to qualify. This would allow the cap to roll over for the following year so that it can be captured. Confidentiality is on lines 100 through 110. It eliminates restrictions on transferability, lines 123 to 159. Has a carry forward, line 160 through 166, and provides a 10-year carry forward, as with most other tax credits. Clarifies the ownership requirement, line 218, that allows long-term lease arrangements and purchase agreements and other common arrangements. And it creates a 10-year sunset, line 217 to 218. Under the current law, the program is scheduled to revert back to pre-2015 version of the program, January 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a most successful program. One of the projects that came about that used this incentive was some buildings that were about to be demolished by neglect. If you ever come to my city, this one had a very small incentive added as a result of this bill. Started out with a building that the owner was going to place about $230 million in restoring to make it a 5-star hotel on River Street. Wound up spending about $380 million on the project because of these large costs that are unanticipated whenever you go in, and they've got to mitigate all that stuff. So I hope that you will see the value in this historic tax credit. It is, again, does not affect those residential properties that are of historic value. This does not affect that at all. This is strictly for larger projects, and I would ask for your favorable consideration. LC 44-16-7S, I hope.
1687S.
Yes. 1687S.
The, what questions from the committee members? Representative Buckner, hang on. You guys.
I know from past work on this subject that for all of the work is pre-approved, so the state is not out any money before the tax credit is given. And that in the past, for every dollar of tax credit, the state actually ended up making about $2.50.
Almost $3.
Almost $3. So this is the best structured tax credit bill I've ever seen in our code. So I hope it passes.
It's a great return on investment. Thank you.
Could you clarify? I think you may have added a very interesting and I think section where you have the workforce housing tax, the workforce housing definition. Is that that just allows the enhanced tax credit? Is that right?
It does for these large projects. And if I may, I've got some folks that can, since this, I don't believe it was in the last version, so I'd like to get somebody else to speak to that.
It would be helpful if it's yeah, come on over there. Just introduce yourself and we'll Lee.
My name's Lee Hughes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I can bring some clarity to that. There was a issue brought to our attention that workforce housing, or also known as low-income housing, doesn't have adequate incentives in the code section as we sit here today. So that was added in again. I think that's in 2 sections here in the it's on lines 81 through 83. And it would take the tax incentive from 25% to 30%.
The goal being to encourage
Yes,
a
so-
segment, even if it's a portion of a larger project, it would encourage
Yes, sir,
affordable
Mr. Chairman.
housing.
The language in here, I'm not finding it right this minute, but there's some requirements that a certain percentage of it be dedicated to low-income housing for a certain number of years. And if you met that criteria, then you went from a 25% tax credit to a 30% tax credit. So it would incentivize someone who, say, took an old church or an old funeral home or an old power plant building and turned it into apartments or condos. They would have to set aside some portion of it for low-income housing. And I think that's particularly of interest in urban areas where you're seeing I think the term is regentrification, and you're pushing people out because of higher rent prices. And this would allow for some portion of it to go to low-income housing.
Thank you. Are there any questions for either the author or the speaker?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
So thank you to Arthur bringing the measure, but I do have some questions. So isn't workforce housing already covered through a low income tax housing credit programs?
I would suspect that you know exactly what you're talking about on that. We were encouraged to add it to this in addition to whatever's already on the code section.
So, and then my question is, so normally it's 25% historic rehabilitation tax credit available for the property. I guess what makes this more important than and I guess the answer is you're trying to supplement workforce housing, but when you're talking about gentrification in Atlanta, that's where in particular Atlanta, are our cities that are experiencing a renaissance downtown, that people are coming in, capital's coming in and providing housing already, in these low-income tax credit programs already there meeting that need. I just don't see why you would pick winners, like throw different credit amounts just because of the type of housing or type of project being done. I'm not against making sure that kind of property is clearly included for eligibility in the historic rehabilitation process, but I just don't think they should enjoy a higher. I don't think the taxpayers ought to be subsidizing at a higher level.
Representative Buckner.
May I respond to that? What's happening in some communities is that neighborhoods are aging out, if you will. As the neighborhood was built, say in the 30s or 40s, and those people have died out, and the neighborhoods become almost blighted. This is a really good way to keep good buildings that have great strong bones that were built well to be rehabbed. And they are historic now because they've lasted as long as they have. They're not 200 years old, but they're still considered historic. And this is a wonderful way to maintain those historic neighborhoods and prevent them to become a blighted community that is a problem that ends up costing more to the community with having to have increased patrols, more crimes there or whatever. So it is a little different than the other low-cost housing because you have to do unusual things to bring these up to code or to bring them up to where people would buy them and use them. But it's, in my opinion, a really good use of money.
And just pardon my, I'm just going to keep the education going. So if I understand you correctly, then this is going to go in because it does say such homes. So a developer would go in and buy a whole street and turn it all into rental properties.
They can be purchased by individuals too.
Mhm.
So workforce housing project means multiple completed historic homes regarding which for a period of 7 years after such homes are occupied, at least 20% of such homes are considered affordable by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development for individuals earning 80%. Well, it means multiple completed homes, and that begs the question: would a single family home qualify? Just one owner, one home.
That's different. That's in a different.
It's set lines 52 through 55, or is it another section in the bill?
Workforce housing credit is defined in 52 through 55 and then laid out in sections in lines 81 through 83.
Okay, thank you for directing me to that. I should have let
Mr. Chairman, can I offer one thought on this too? I think it's often overlooked that these historic tax credits can be used by nonprofits. You could have a church, for example, who owned a campus of properties, and the property across the street is no longer part of their strategic plan going forward. They could take that property and rehab it and make it into a commercial use project or project that included some low-income housing. So sometimes it's helpful to think about it in terms of that. It's not always a developer that comes in and buys a piece of property to rehab it. Sometimes it's owned by entities who then want to make use of it where before they were not able to.
Chairman.
I'm flying in here half, not knowing what's been said. I just heard the mention of the component on housing. And one of our neighboring counties, Mr. Chairman, if I may, has seen they were part of the GIC program, and they saw some rehabilitation in some historic structures that also included a housing component. And I think there was a multiplier effect regarding, what was really blighted buildings and blighted areas that they were able to see some improvement on. And I've heard a lot of testimony regarding those projects. And so when this bill came forward, it was just a suggestion as to see how we could get that multiplier effect possibly worked in. And I think, this is something that the folks that have brought this bill worked on trying to achieve. So just,
So
you
you're
know,
talking kind of a critical mass that comes from a project as opposed to one individual, one place, or by the workforce housing project being multiple. You're saying that it brings a critical mass that stop.
well, I think obviously if you have a bit of a multiplier effect, if you're providing an added benefit, I think, to that community, when you have two needs, you have, a historic, kind of a revitalization, and then you have, kind of an affordable housing, workforce housing component too. I think that serves an added effect potentially, but obviously something for the committee to discuss and review.
Thank you. Any other questions, any other comments that you need to make, or you?
I'm good to go.
This has been a hearing only. We'll, is there, somebody else? Did they want to talk?
Is there somebody to testify?
Is there anyone online who was scheduled to testify or? All right.
Okay.
Then we will take all this information in. Thank you for your presentation. We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting of Special Subcommittee on Tax Revision.